Welcome back to another episode of Coffee with Coker. If you don't know, Coffee with Coker is a healthcare business podcast, and we talk about issues and solutions involving healthcare organizations, specifically talking about how these organizations can effectively navigate the changing healthcare industry. My name is Mark Reibold. I'm the host of the podcast. I'm also a senior vice president here at Coker. If you're not familiar with the Coker Group, we're a national healthcare consulting firm. We work with hospitals, health systems, physician groups, and kind of everything in between as it relates to healthcare services. And so we're back for another episode today. This was a fun one because it's definitely different from what we have done thus far. I'll provide a little bit of a couple of disclaimers here. I think first of all, a couple of the guests were remote, and so if the sound is a little different from what it usually is, just bear with us on that, and just know that we had a little bit of we're trying to figure out the sound there as it relates to others outside participating, but I think that was okay, and I think it certainly didn't negatively impact the discussion itself. And it's also different one because we have a couple of participants that are outside Coker. One is a guest that has been on the podcast multiple times. He's a senior vice president here at Coker, Justin Chamblee, and he leads our physician comp area. If you've heard our podcast in the past, you're certainly familiar with Justin, most likely. But we also had two other guests. So we had Jack Liu and Matt BonDurant. Matt and Jack are from a company called ProCARE Portal. Again, kind of a disclaimer here. ProCARE Portal is a company that specializes in physician compensation automation, or physician comp solutions. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second, but it's not, if you have listened to the podcast in the past, our intention is not to get on and just try to sell services or talk about all the different things Coker does, or any other company for that matter. We want to make sure that what we're talking about here on the podcast is topical, it's relevant to the marketplace, and the purpose is not to just get on here and pat ourselves on the back. That being said, we do have a relationship with ProCARE Portal. Coker owns a stake in the company, and we have partnered with them. And there are multiple reasons for that. But at the end of the day, we see ProCARE Portal as a extremely valuable solution for our clients, that being hospitals, health systems, physician groups, to better, more efficiently manage their compensation models. And there are a lot of different components to that, but that's what we're talking about with Matt and Jack and Justin today, and that's what ProCARE Portal does. The topic today is physician compensation automation solutions with ProCARE Portal. What we wanted to do is give Jack and Matt a chance to talk about why are automation solutions related to physician comp relevant and needed and important in today's marketplace. We're not talking about ProCARE Portal in terms of the technical aspects behind the solution itself or the software. This isn't a demo. This is talking about why automation is relevant to the physician comp landscape. And I thought it was a great discussion. We talked about a lot. Without me going on any further, I did want to disclose that and kind of explain why we had kind of a little bit of a unique approach to this particular episode. And if you want to learn more, if you want more information about anything we do around comp or anything ProCARE Portal does and their solution around comp management, we're happy to provide that if you want to follow up with us. More than anything, we definitely thank you for listening. We want to encourage you all to follow us, subscribe to us. If you want to hear more of our episodes that we've done in the past, you can find us at coffeewithcoker.com. You can also go to cokergroup.com and find the podcast there as well. So we encourage you guys to go back and listen to those. We, again, thank you guys for listening, and we look forward to this discussion on physician compensation automation. All right, well, let's get into the discussion. And as we mentioned in the introduction, we're talking today with a couple of new guests that haven't been on the podcast before, as well as one that has been on a few episodes. So I'm looking forward to the discussion today. And we're talking about physician compensation, but specifically talking about automation solutions around physician comp. And we're joined by Jack Liu and Matt BonDurant, who are from a company called ProCARE Portal. So welcome, Matt and Jack.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having us. We're really thrilled to be included in this great series that you have going on.
Yeah, and I think it is going to be a great discussion. Also joining as I mentioned, who's been on the podcast before, but Justin Chamblee, who's a senior vice president and heads up physician comp services here at CwC. So Justin, welcome back.
Thanks. Always good to be here.
Yeah. As I mentioned, and we're going to jump right into the discussion here. And I also just want to reiterate, though, as we do this, ProCARE Portal is a partner of the CwC Group. We have worked with them for literally a couple of years now. It's a solution that came up on our radar a few years ago, as I said, as they were early on in the development stages, and it's progressed well. And so they're a very valued partner of CwC. And so, we certainly recognize that we're not a CwC, is not a technology solution company, but we definitely like to partner with solutions that tie in with what we do in terms of being able to create value for our clients. And that's exactly why we wanted to talk to Matt and Jack, and it's why we enjoy working with the team over at ProCARE. So with that, and we'll just jump right in, but I guess to tee us off here, why don't Jack and Matt, you guys start off maybe just a little bit of background and introduction, and then we'll kind of jump in, talk more about automation of physician comp.
Sure thing. Yeah, I'm Matt BonDurant. I spent my career in operations and strategy for physician organizations, working to improve process and integration. It's frequently centered around technology deployments or maximization. And it was in that work that I really saw a significant need for provider organization solutions. If we did want to improve individual organizations and equally, as important, the U.S. health system as a whole. So I'm a founder and managing partner with ProCARE, and we're really helping to reform healthcare by fundamentally optimizing the way the providers are incentivized.
Jack Liu here. My background is in software design, development, and delivery. So prior to founding ProCARE with Matt, I'd spent most of my career in the incentive compensation management space, focused on Fortune 500 sales organizations. I was involved in many facets of sales comp, ranging from pre-sales to solution delivery. And a mutual friend and cohort had brought me and Matt together to collaborate on this idea of developing a comprehensive compensation automation platform to address the specific needs of health systems and physician organizations. And thus, ProCARE Portal was born.
Yeah, and that's interesting, Jack, because obviously the incentive comp piece and the management of incentive comp is coming bigger and bigger within the physician comp world. And so we'll talk about that actually a little bit more as we get deeper. I tell you what, before we go in deeper on the solution itself, let's maybe, Justin, this is probably better for you, but let's look at just kind of an overview of how recent changes in the broader healthcare marketplace and how those changes have been, in fact, affecting physicians specifically around their compensation.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is a area that we deal with day in and day out in a variety of respects. But if you look at the market big picture, I think there's been changes that have affected physician compensation both on a scope standpoint and a scale standpoint. And addressing the scale standpoint first, most medical groups have gotten bigger, meaning health systems have continued to create a critical mass of employed physicians or aligned physicians, whether it be through a CIN, a professional services agreement, whatever it may be. But the scale, the number of physicians working directly with or aligned with a health system has grown. So that has been one key change, and I'll come back and loop that into how it affects physician compensation here in a moment. The other change is in the scope of practice. Historically, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago, when the market was predominantly fee-for-service based, physician compensation plans were pretty easy to administer, to manage. I mean, it was typically dealing with a measure of production and a measure of converting that production to compensation. And so even if we were doing the calculations on a manual basis, it was a pretty straightforward endeavor. And what we have seen is as the market has shifted more to a value-based reimbursement market, or at least a balanced volume and value-based reimbursement market, the incentives have changed such that we're not only focusing on a productivity incentive anymore. It's focused on both production, but then a myriad of other metrics, whether those are quality metrics, citizenship metrics, patient satisfaction metrics, expense control metrics, building in call pay, medical directorship services, and on and on and on. And so models that used to be quite simple and easy to administer from a scope standpoint have become complex with many more moving parts and pieces that are difficult to administer. And when you layer that complexity on top of the scale growth that we've seen, it increases exponentially because we're dealing with these complex models for hundreds of physicians, and trying to administer those on a Excel spreadsheet or on some other means is becoming more difficult. And so that it really has changed the market to where the manpower that is going to deliver and effectuate or adjudicate these physician compensation calculations is quite extensive.
Especially with the not just the manpower, but the accuracy and complexity, because as you do get into more risk-based contracting, things like that, where the hospitals have to take a lot of different variables into consideration to truly understand the economic returns and value. It's more than just kind of like you said, the traditional fee-for-service model where there's a wRVU conversion factor, and that's essentially the calculation.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, obviously manual processes are extremely subject to human error. And when you're dealing with something as sensitive as a physician's compensation, that can be pretty bad.
Yeah.
For lack of better terms.
Yeah. At least it leaves a lot of ground for potential exposure.
That's right.
So, all right. So we looked at the kind of broader industry context, what's going on, and the why around, what Jack and Matt have been doing around ProCARE. Let's talk maybe next a little bit about compensation automation specifically, what that means, what's happening in that market, and ultimately that'll kind of allow us to view a little bit more level of detail the solution itself.
So, as Justin had mentioned, the changing landscape of healthcare has really fueled the need for technology in the space, as we've seen with the prevalence of VBC models and, driving the increasingly complexity within health systems. And this is not different from other industries. So I've mentioned I've come from the sales comp industry, and this is a similar concept that we had seen a decade or more ago. And what I wanted to talk about is really kind of conceptually what comp automation is and what to look for in a technology solution, in a technology platform in this space. So everything we talk about is kind of centered around compensation management, incentive compensation management, but it really touches upon a lot of other functionalities and facets of the health organization. With respect to data management, and as we all know from any technology solution, it all starts with the data. If you've garbage in, garbage out, and so one of the things I think orgs should look for in a solution is effective data management, built-in data validation, and the ability to not only upload and integrate data on an automated basis, but also on an ad hoc basis or, on demand. Now, this is very important because, as you know, with enterprise systems, data drives everything from not just your calculations and scorecards, but also fuels your downstream analytics, reporting, and, to be able to operationalize the metrics. So when we sought out to develop this platform, we kept all of these things in mind, and things that I've have learned, taking the best attributes from various enterprise systems in the sales comp world, and also improving upon processes that were lacking certain functionalities. And what we've developed is a comprehensive comp automation platform. It's not just an incentive compensation management application, but it also has touch points in financial operations, in automating, not just automating pay files, but also general ledger accruals. Of course, we've got an analytics layer on top of calculated compensation results that then can be operationalized and evaluated. Some of the other things that are often talked about in this in the physician compensation market is around fair market value analysis and compliance, which we also satisfy. But more than that is the ability to adjudicate any compensation plan of any complexity. And the way we do that, and what is important, and I think what sets technologies apart in this space, is the ability or the existence of a full-blown rules engine that is extensible and fully configurable by the end users, so that anytime any variable components such as rates, thresholds, goals, bonus pool percentages that need to be changed and modeled, this can easily be done without the looming overhead of development and add-on services.
Yeah. I think that's interesting, Jack. It's a good point. Sorry to interrupt you there, but it I think it brings up a really important point here that there are a number of models, solutions, applications, whatever, out there that do different things, but maybe different components of comp automation. But nothing that really I've seen that brings it all together. And and Justin, maybe you can comment on this too. But the thing you mentioned there about compliance, fair market value compliance. We do, of course, a lot of business around fair market value opinions, and whether they are updated over a certain period of time, or newly developed or newly adjusted comp arrangements that a hospital system may have across their physician network. There are a lot of variables that go into that, and so there's a lot of things that can slip through the cracks, both from an efficiency standpoint on the front end, but just as important on the compliance side on the back end.
Yeah, this is Justin. I can make a quick comment on that. And one of the things that we've seen, speaking to the compliance side, is working with clients even over the last few months. Individuals will come to us, or health systems will come to us, wanting a fair market value review done of a client's or a physician's arrangement. And so we will get the data and start to perform our analysis. But what we find is even the ability for them to pull together the contractual language or the contractual data in the agreement such that we can evaluate it has been problematic, because right now, once again, it's all a manual process, meaning they're coming and saying, okay, here's what we think the physician was paid based on what's in his contract, here's what we think the incentive structure is, versus it being preloaded into a system and saying, hey, here are the metrics, here's a report of the metrics that we need to evaluate. Once again, even that process is manual driven, and the challenge that creates is, once again, we're trying to evaluate something that is subject to human error, meaning we may be evaluating something that is completely not the contract in place because that's just simply the manual data that they gave us. Mm-hmm. And so whether it's on the front end, whether it's on the adjudication standpoint or the compliance side, that ability to get good data is always a challenge.
Yeah. And another thing about this is the integration piece. And I think, going through all the different components that are important to kind of broad spectrum comp automation scenario, you also have to think about integrating and the importance that this has integrated to the broader revenue cycle management, that whole scenario, as well as the HR systems in place. And usually those are a lot of disparate, maybe disconnected systems, maybe completely different departments that are really driving those things. So, and of course, everyone knows when you're working with physicians, a physician group, anything that relates to impacting their compensation, their income, that's something that is very difficult to go back and correct or amend on the back end. Whereas, you want to do everything you can on the front end to, which I guess brings in, Jack, maybe the point around, and this is, I know, a common issue with all kinds of different technology solutions in the healthcare space, but the ability for customization and configuration as it relates to the solution itself, but also from an integration standpoint. I don't know, maybe talk about that, because that's, that's almost something, it's a requirement nowadays, especially when you're dealing with physicians.
Yes, absolutely, Mark. That is a big one. When we talk about data integration and, especially in healthcare, a lot of these health organizations are jaded by recent, EMR implementations, right? Mm-hmm. That, they think back to, a lot of burdensome, scope creeping, projects. Well, we've eliminated the need for any type of direct integration, for example, through HL7 protocols, because our system has the ability to take flat file data, extracts or reports out of upstream source systems and directly load it into our application. Now, I mentioned previously that we have built-in validation, and this is something that, everyone should look for in a solution in the market, is that, with respect to data, there needs to be some built-in guardrails to detect data anomalies, to do specific data transformations and lookups, because like you said, Mark, a lot of the times we're dealing with a lot of disparate systems across a large health system and network. And so the requirements around that are, of the ultimate importance, again, because garbage in, garbage out. And we've taken, we had the foresight and we've taken the steps and to develop these necessary guardrails with respect to data integration.
Yeah, really good point. And so let me go back for a minute, maybe, and Matt, maybe this is where you can chime in here, but let's talk again, or a little bit deeper, about the why, if you will, and we talked a little bit about kind of broad market perspective, but for you guys specifically, in terms of seeing the opportunity and the need out in the marketplace, talk a little bit more about the why, and ultimately, we can get into the specifics around what the goal is and the how and all that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And Justin touched on some of those, with the reliance of spreadsheets and manual processes and other outdated things that organizations are doing. And the other main one is the inability to develop and administer compensation plans that are consistent with the paradigm shift and from fee for service to complex value models. So this is made worse, by as payment models and arrangements become more complex from the way the systems are getting paid. So not trickling that down to the physicians is causing major strategic issues within these organizations. So we wanted to solve that and allow for the optimization of that incentive down to the provider level where the work is occurring, and start to mend those relationships and create a collaborative work effort, which is many times driven by the compensation model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's right. Maybe talk a little bit more about the some of the new things that are going on. I mean, I think the importance of, and we've alluded to it here, but when you think about the impact that the broader shift from volume to value, Justin, you talked about that. And I know you guys alluded to value-based care and kind of what that means. I mean, the need for synchronization between physician comp and a very rapidly changing managed care contracting landscape, specifically risk-based contracting and things like that. This, in order to understand, if you're a hospital, to understand the broader compensation the broader value case or broader value, position that your organization has and where you need to go, you got to bring all these things together. And I feel like, we've gotten used to in the healthcare industry to, kind of work in our own little silos and don't always make those connections. But, I think the risk profile is changing a little bit there. And so the onus is on the hospitals to make sure they are taking these different things into consideration. What are your thoughts there in terms of bringing some of those things together and kind of building that broader value perspective?
Well, right. Once you get plumbed in all the right data components and the data, your ability to step back on that and do modeling and shadowing on previous data sets with new models gives you insight of what it's going to do to your organization and how it's going to affect your providers.
Yeah.
And you can even shadow, put those models and shadow those with your provider groups before implementing them. And then you get actionable data and people can actually start to make changes.
Yeah.
Another thing we find very important is team collaboration. Adding in team collaboration in a manual model is generally not possible. But when we can put in team collaborative models, we start to get groups working together. We cross lines, and that's something that we've been very passionate about putting into the compensation world of healthcare.
Yeah, that's interesting. We had a podcast a while back on physician relationship dynamic, and that was something we couldn't talk about that. Obviously communications is important, physician engagement, but you can't really talk about that without also talking about the financial incentives. And so from a collaboration standpoint, I guess the other angle on that too is the transparency factor, because we've talked for years about data transparency as it relates to broader transparency on the EMR, EHR side, patient transparency, things like that. But when we all know this, we've been in these arrangements, we've been in these scenarios, multiple physicians, multiple groups, perhaps multiple specialties. It's not uncommon for, some physicians to kind of become jaded a little bit because they think this group over here is getting something different or something's, misinterpreted in the data, or we're not calculating the RVUs correctly or anything like that. And so that just doesn't do anything favorable for the hospital or the groups or the physicians as it relates to that positive engagement piece.
That's right. And in manual solutions, you have to roll up that data. So you're reporting on one number for the month for a given metric, whether that's RVU or an operational metric. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot of trust in what's built in that. And so when you have to drop that detail, you start to lose the end users. And when you put in an automated solution that's built on data, you keep that detail all the way through. And that just provides not only the actionable data that providers can look at and use, but they also just trust it.
Yeah.
Now that they can actually see how the calculation works.
Yeah. Is the role of MACRA play into kind of what you guys are doing or seeing at all here and from an automation standpoint?
Absolutely. Macra's putting 7.5% of their payments on the line here or more as things advance here. And, organizations that aren't thinking ahead of how do I get my physicians to think that same way, maybe are having, salary-based models or, with the productivity incentive, which, productivity is not going anywhere in compensation models. But when we're not bringing in this big looming new strategic direction that all payers are following and have a strategy to put that in place, then these organizations are going to be in trouble because they haven't acted on that, and it's going to come here quicker than they wanted to.
Right. Yeah. I know I've talked to a handful of hospital systems clients we've worked with that have essentially said, the standards for complying with MACRA or participating under MACRA aren't that great. The problem is it's, the logistics of it, right? It's the challenge of reporting on and having the, access to data and the right data and being able to put it into a format that is, reportable in a way that's compliant under those provisions. So all the more reason to kind of have it under one roof, I would think.
Right. And then, actually incentivize the providers for the work that they're doing. And if you talk to them at the ground level, they're doing all this. They're being asked to collaborate, being asked to do quality, all things that physicians want to do. Intrinsically, that's what they came into this profession for. But we ask them to do all those things, and then we don't reward them with incentive. It starts to create that animosity problems and, slowness to see changes occur.
Yeah. One other thing, this is, Justin, that we've seen in the consulting realm, and then it's largely impacted by the reimbursement realm, is that it is constantly moving right now, meaning it is even take MIPS, it is moving more and more into a risk-based model. So it is not, hey, here's the plan and it's going to be like this for 5 years. It's constantly changing year over year over year, which what we've seen has made compensation models more of a living and breathing organism versus something that is static, meaning it's less of a contract that is entered into and stays constant for 5 years and then is renewed or changed at that time. And so, Matt and Jack, maybe you all can talk about that dynamic from a technology standpoint and how sort of the technology solutions are helpful in seeing that shift from a static compensation approach to more of a living and breathing dynamic compensation approach.
Absolutely, Justin. This is Jack. I think it's logical to think that, this emerging niche market that we find ourselves in is only going to grow and increase in the future, simply because these health plans have already realized increased quality and cost outcomes from value-based models, right? And so the idea is, I think that will continue to evolve as time goes on, just as you stated, Justin. And that obviously presents a lot of challenges from a technology standpoint, from an operational standpoint, really. But without the aid of technology, it would be virtually impossible to manage. With respect to what the offerings are available currently in the market, really, from a contract standpoint, like you said, it's not really just a static contract that's going to be instituted for years and years. This is more of an evolution of compensation models. And so it requires a lot of, Matt had touched upon shadowing and modeling, and really that ability to model and shadow new and evolving value-based care models gives a health system the line of sight to exactly what the impacts are from, an organization standpoint. And so with platforms like ProCARE Portal, the ability to not just to, have all the data in one place, but be able to operationalize that data to see the downstream effects on the organization as a whole is of great value, I think.
Yeah, and I just wonder how many health systems have been stymied in terms of their adoption of value-based initiatives solely because of the concerns of adjudicating compensation. Meaning, I think all would agree that in order to effectuate change, the incentives have to be aligned. Meaning the physicians have to be incentivized to follow the direction that the health system wants to go from a value-based standpoint. And if we can't get those incentives aligned, meaning we cannot adjudicate the incentives, it presents problems in terms of moving down that pathway. And I just question how many health systems have been stymied by that, meaning they choose not to go down that path solely because they can't figure out how to incentivize or track the incentives.
Well, and we're dealing with it right now, right? So, I mean, literally, right as we're recording this, CMS is considering their proposals for it was called neutral site payments, which is basically a cut in HOPD rates by 60%. And as we know, many of the hospital acquisitions and hospital physician joint venture deals that have gone on for the last number of years, a large degree of them, much of the value was, especially when you're talking about a specialty physician group or surgical specialty where they're doing a lot of HOPD procedures, that a lot of these deals and the comp arrangements took that into consideration. So if those payments start getting cut, a lot of the value could be taken away, or at least the value assumptions for those arrangements could be taken away. Now, does that mean they just go in and immediately cut compensation? Well, of course, that's not going to work out very well for either side, because that's just not going to be a good place to start. But to understand the impact of that, you have to get back to these comp arrangements and incorporate that into, okay, what is the real impact going to be on the system as a whole? How does that trickle down to, the individual, even at the individual provider level? And, you can get a better idea of which direction you're going to have to go in the future. So with that, the other piece I wanted to touch on real quick, I think going back to the benefit of data, specifically on the back end, maybe just talk briefly, Jack or Matt, about the reporting capabilities. And I'm not talking about the capabilities of the platform itself, but I mean the importance of having better data, and then what can be done with that data to kind of create more value.
Sure, Mark. So Matt had touched upon some of those elements previously with respect to audit trails, and something as simple as being able to walk through from end to end how a KPI is measured and ultimately paid out for healthcare providers provides first of all great visibility to understanding the comp models. And because governing bodies like MACRA and such are pushing these, VBC models with increasing complexity, a lot of times I feel like these physicians don't even really understand, how they're being comped or how they're being measured. And that creates, a great unalignment between the system and the physicians, which leads to greater problems, as we all know. And so reporting becomes very important, not just from, reporting, comp results or payment standpoint. It becomes ultimately really important for aligning the physicians and the system, because it helps them understand how they're being measured and ultimately how they're being paid.
Yeah,
that's right. And putting on my operations hat, I mean, so much time is spent building operational metrics, charge lag, as an example, attending meetings, all these different things that we keep up with, and having to build those analytics and create those rules and create those reports month after month goes beyond what's even considered in the bucket of compensation now. But as we tie compensation to those metrics, it's all part of the process. So, really looking at not just the payment for your RVUs, but the payment for all the work that you're doing and the metrics that have to be created there. And being able to access that or create the rules and manage the rules for those in one system and get ad hoc data reports out on each of those individual metrics gives you a lot of insight into your organization and changes the paradigm to spending all your time calculating models to now spending your time managing the model, improving the models. And that's really the shift that we're seeing occur.
Yeah, it's actionable in a manner that can drive future behavior as opposed to just report on past behavior. This has been really helpful. And before we kind of wrap up, I want to give you, I know the solution is still relatively new to the marketplace, and obviously we'll make sure the more information is provided about those listeners that want to learn more, maybe get more information and talk to you guys further. But even though you've only been out in the market for a relatively short period, maybe talk for just a minute about what have you seen thus far in terms of what progress has been made, any sort of kind of highlights around, here's what we're seeing in a relatively short time frame.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we're working with community hospitals, integrated health networks, and we're getting systems in place in an average of 14 weeks, and our finance teams alone are seeing 7 times the time savings, and just the calculation and distribution of the reports, let alone all the other things that we talk about that many times they don't have an ability to get to today. We've had clients that have we found calculation resulting errors of that created 5% payment fluctuations for specific components. And now not only are we ensuring that the calculation is correct, but now they have an ease of way to track fair market value and worry about compliance on a bigger picture, not just on the individual side.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I got to think too, again, going back to the whole physician engagement piece, this is it's often a very tough, even uphill climb conversation hospitals are having to have with their, medical staffs and physician networks. So just kind of doing more to solidify those relationships, keeping them closer, but, making sure the value is there for both sides. I have to think that you've seen that as well.
When you're behind months on producing calculations and providing them to your providers, and now you're getting them in effectively real time, and they can trust them and they can drill them back and they can know, oh yes, that case I did X date, I can see I got credit for that. It's going to take a bit of time, but you start to repair that relationship immediately when you're getting them data and getting them results and they can see it and access it. So we are seeing, even in a short period of time, those relationships improving.
Yeah, I have no doubt, and I'm looking forward to see what else comes in the future, because it is exciting. I think because it's early on into this whole concept. Honestly, as many different types of technologies that are out there, even as slow as the healthcare industry sometimes can be in adopting and implementing and optimizing technology. Just the progress that's been made in a relatively short period, I think, it's only going to continue to grow in terms of need, but also in terms of value and the return that comes from that. So this has been, I think, an interesting conversation. And like I said, it's something that I know we'll come back and talk more about and revisit later. It's an ongoing thing as it relates to what we do around comp services. But it's also, I know it's going to be something that as we do start to see it, the automation piece become more prevalent in the marketplace, we're gonna continue to talk about it and revisit it, which is why, again, we wanted to have you guys on the podcast. We wanted to introduce ProCARE Portal, but really, I think there's going to be a lot more to come on this. So Jack and Matt, I appreciate it, and we look forward to talking further in future episodes.
Thank you much, Mark.
Yeah, we're excited about the market and the possibilities, and it's great to come and talk to you here today.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, guys. We hope you enjoyed that episode of Coffee with Coker, and we thank you for listening. We want to encourage all of our listeners to participate and contribute in the podcast. So if you have any questions on any of the things we discussed in this episode, any of the topics that were presented, please feel free to ask us. Also, we welcome your feedback and suggestions. If you have any ideas related to the material we discussed in this episode, or in any episode, please let us know and we'll make sure to incorporate it. And if you have ideas for topics you'd like to hear more information about in future episodes, please send those suggestions to us. We would love to hear them and we'd love to incorporate them into our future episodes. You can find us online and on social media. Start with our website, and specifically the podcast is coffeewithcoker.com. You can also find that through the main Coker website at cokergroup.com. You can also find us on social media, Twitter at Coker Group, and then on LinkedIn you can search for Coker Group and find our page and the page for some of our team members as well there. So you can find us and reach out to us in a number of places. And then if you want to contact us directly, one of the best ways to do that, email feedback@cokergroup.com. That's feedback@cokergroup.com. And again, we'd love to get your feedback, and we'd love to encourage everyone to subscribe to the podcast so that you can be notified when future episodes are released. We look forward to the next episode, and we look forward to getting your suggestions and feedback on this episode. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to speaking with you again on future episodes.